My name is Mary and I'm 35 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon, which means I'm trained to walk into blood, panic, broken bones, screaming families, and still know exactly what must be done first. In my world, seconds are the difference between a recovery and a eulogy. I've held beating hearts in my hands and felt the literal weight of a life hanging by a thread. I've learned to shut down my emotions to let my hands stay steady. But nothing in an operating room, no amount of carnage or chaos, prepared me for the sound I heard when I came home early that Tuesday afternoon. My daughter, Emma, was sobbing inside my own house. It wasn't the sound of a child who had scraped a knee, it was a thin, terrified cry that makes a mother's heart stop beating before her brain even understands why. I pushed the front door open, my surgical bag slipping from my shoulder, and I froze just long enough to see the truth. My father, Charles, was in my living room, standing over an 8-year-old child and yelling threats while my older sister, Rachel, was tearing through my master bedroom like a thief who already believed she deserved everything she touched. The violation was absolute. My drawers were pulled out, their contents spilled like entrails across the hardwood. My mother's old mahogany jewelry box was missing from the dresser. Important papers from my home office file cabinet were scattered across the hallway like autumn leaves. Someone had searched for the deed, the apartment documents, and the blue folder I kept locked away for a very specific reason. For one surgical second, the doctor and me tried to triage the scene: child first, exit second, threat assessment third, evidence fourth. The mother and me wanted to scream, to run at them with the fury of 1,000 storms. Instead, I stepped back into the shadow beside the hallway, pulled out my phone with trembling but precise fingers, and dialed 911 without making a sound. When the operator answered, I whispered into the receiver, "My family broke into my house. They are currently threatening my daughter. Send police now. I am on the premises." Before I tell you what they were really searching for, and why the sirens outside ruined far more than just their afternoon, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The operator told me to stay on the line, and I did. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to rush into that room, to put myself between my father's rage and my daughter's fear. Emma was only 8. She was trying to be brave in that heartbreaking way children are when they realize the adults around them have lost their minds. She was silent, stiff, sitting on the edge of the sofa, trying not to make things worse. My father, Charles, stood over her with one hand braced on the wall, blocking her path to the door as if my home belonged to him. He looked older, more haggard than I remembered, but his eyes were filled with that same self-righteous fire that had scorched my childhood. My older sister Rachel was in the other room, and I could hear the wooden scrape of my nightstand hitting the wall, then the sharp, sickening crack of a ceramic lamp breaking. "Tell me where your mother keeps the blue folder, Emma," Charles snapped, his voice a low growl. "Don't act stupid. You've seen it. You're in her office all the time." Emma's voice was a whisper, broken by a sob. "I don't know. I don't know where it is." "She's lying, Dad." Rachel called out from my bedroom, her voice high and frantic. "Mary always hides things. Jewelry, contracts, bank papers. She thinks she's better than us. She probably has a safe we haven't found yet." My hand tightened around the phone. The operator could hear everything. In the operating room, panic is the shadow of death. It kills people faster than the actual injured. I forced myself to breathe. I checked Charles's hands. No weapon, just his own arrogance. I checked the distance between him and Emma. Too close. I checked Rachel's designer bag sitting on my bed. It was heavy, bulging, and I could see the edge of my mother's pearl necklace draped over the side. That necklace had been left to me in my mother's will, along with a small share in an apartment building she had quietly invested in years before she died. She knew my father was a gambler with a silver tongue and that Rachel was a black hole of financial need. She had left me those assets not because she loved me more, but because she knew I was the only one who wouldn't set them on fire. Charles had always called it family property, conveniently ignoring the legal documents that said otherwise. Rachel had always called it unfair, even though she had received her own inheritance, a substantial cash sum, and burned through every cent of it within 3 years on failed businesses and lifestyle choices. I had helped them more times than I could count. I paid Charles's property taxes once when he claimed the county was hours away from seizing his land. I gave Rachel money for a high-profile divorce attorney when she swore her husband was hiding millions. He wasn't, she just wanted more. I covered medical bills, car repairs, and emergency loans that always seemed to fund a luxury weekend the moment the check cleared. I even missed Emma's first school recital because Charles called me in tears, saying he was having a heart attack. I rushed to his house, terrified, only to find him packing for a hunting trip, claiming he just felt a little flutter and needed me to check him out. Each time, I told myself that love meant patience. Each time, they learned that my guilt had a specific dollar amount. But the turning point, the moment the bridge finally burned, was my wedding 3 months ago. I had planned a small, elegant ceremony. I wanted my father to walk me down the aisle. I wanted my sister to be my maid of honor. I had paid for their flights, their hotel rooms, and even Rachel's dress. But the morning of the wedding, I received a text. Not a call. A text. Sorry, Mary. Rachel really needed a mental health break, so we used the flight vouchers to go to Cabo instead. We figured you're a doctor, you're busy, you won't even notice we're gone. Have a great day. They skipped my wedding to go on a vacation they paid for with my money. I stood in my white dress, staring at my phone, and felt something inside me go cold. I walked down that aisle alone, and I realized that I didn't have a family. I had a set of parasites who shared my DNA. I stopped answering their calls. I blocked their numbers. And apparently, 3 months of silence was enough to make them desperate. Rachel's mental health break in Cabo had obviously been expensive, and Charles's debts were finally catching up to him. Listen to me, little girl, Charles said, lowering his voice in a way that made my skin crawl. Your mother is selfish. If she loved this family, she would help us. If she doesn't sign those papers, people are going to lose everything. They're going to take my house, Emma. Do you want your grandpa to be homeless? Emma whispered, please don't yell. I want my mommy. That was the moment the surgeon in me stepped aside and the mother took full control. Something inside me went completely still. Not calm, not peaceful, but surgical. Precise. I had seen families collapse in hospital waiting rooms when fear made them cruel, but this wasn't fear. This was a calculated raid on my life. Rachel walked out of my bedroom holding a stack of documents. I found copies of the apartment agreement, but not the transfer certificate. She must have moved it to a safe deposit box. Charles cursed, his face turning a mottled purple. Then we make her sign new ones. We'll stay here until she gets home. Rachel laughed, a bitter, breathless sound. You think she'll sign after this? Look at this place, Dad. She'll call the cops. She won't, Charles said with terrifying certainty. She will sign if she wants her daughter to stop being scared. She's soft, Rachel. She always has been. The operator's voice whispered through my phone, officers are 30 seconds out. Are you in a safe position? Not yet, I whispered. I lifted the phone, making sure the camera was recording, and I stepped out from the shadows into the light of the living room. I could see the whole room now, my daughter trapped against the bookshelf, my father pacing like a man rehearsing a villain's monologue, my sister holding the papers that represented years of my mother's foresight and my own hard work. For the first time in my life, I didn't ask myself how they could do this to me. I asked myself what kind of mother I would be if I let them do this to Emma. When I stepped into the room, Emma saw me first. Her face changed so fast it nearly broke me in two. Hope, shame, fear, and a massive wave of relief flashed across her eyes. She tried to stand up, but Charles spun around, his eyes widening as he saw me. Mary, he barked, not with guilt, but with the tone of an owner speaking to a disobedient pet. You're home early. Rachel appeared behind him, clutching my mother's pearls in one hand and my property folder in the other. For one long, agonizing second, nobody moved. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. Emma, I said, my voice as steady as it was when I called for a scalpel. Come to me. Right now. Charles shifted, his body instinctively moving to block her path. He was a big man, and he used his size like a weapon. Now, hold on, Mary. We need to talk. You've been ignoring us, and we have a family crisis. I raised my phone, the screen facing him. Don't move another inch toward her. He looked at the phone, then at my face. The realization began to sink in. Are you recording us? In your own house? Yes, I said. Rachel's expression twisted into a sneer. You psycho. You're recording your own father and sister? We're family. No, I replied, my voice dropping an octave. I am recording 2 intruders who broke into my home, stole my mother's jewelry, threatened my daughter, and searched for legal documents they have no legal right to touch. You aren't family right now. You're a police report. Charles took a step toward me, his hand raised as if to swat the phone away. Careful how you talk to your father, Mary. That surgeon's salary has made you forget where you came from. That sentence might have worked on me 10 years ago. It might have worked 5 years ago. Back then, I still believed that respect was a debt I owed him regardless of his behavior. I still believed that helping them meant bleeding quietly so they could call it love. But when I saw Emma ducking behind my leg, shaking so hard her fingers were digging into my scrubs, every old rule died a violent death. You are not in charge here, I said, each word a cold shard of ice. This is my house. Those are my documents. And that is my child. You have 10 seconds to put everything down before the world changes for you. Rachel threw the folder onto the coffee table, the paper sliding across the glass. Your house. Your documents. Your child. That's always the problem with you, isn't it? Everything is yours because you think your degree makes you better than us. It's mine because I worked for it while you were busy spending inheritance money on vacations you didn't earn, I shot back. Charles laughed, but his face had gone pale around the mouth. You think being a doctor makes you untouchable? We made sacrifices for you to get through school. You made loans out of my guilt, I corrected him. And I paid them back 10 times over until I finally learned the difference between helping my family and being hunted by them. Rachel's eyes flickered toward the front door. She was the smart one, she could feel the shift in the air. She hadn't expected me to stand my ground. For years, I had answered their insults with explanations. I had defended my schedule, defended my savings, defended why I couldn't pay for another one of their emergencies. But today, there would be no explanations. I looked at the folder on the table. I saw exactly what they had found: my apartment records, insurance papers, tax copies, and a blank transfer form I had kept only because my attorney told me never to discard anything related to the estate. But something else was missing. Where's my spare key? I asked, my eyes locking onto Rachel's bag. The one hidden in the kitchen drawer. Charles crossed his arms. Don't start with the accusations. How did you get into my locked house, Rachel? She snapped, her voice cracking. That's not the point. The point is we're in trouble, and you're sitting on a gold mine while your father is about to lose his roof. You took the key when you came over for Emma's birthday, didn't you? I asked. I remembered her lingering in the kitchen while I was out back with the kids. I had trusted her. Charles slammed his hand down on the coffee table so hard the glass rattled. Emma flinched, and I pulled her tighter against me. Sign the papers, Mary. Rachel's lender needs collateral, and my land is already tied up with the bank. If you transfer your apartment share to us temporarily, we can fix everything. It's just a signature. Temporarily? I repeated. Is that what you call forging my name on the lines you already filled out in pencil? His eyes narrowed. He knew I'd seen the papers. Rachel stepped forward, her voice suddenly turning soft, manipulative. Mary, please. You don't understand the people Dad owes money to. This isn't just about the house anymore. I turned my phone so they could see the active call timer and the GPS coordinates. The police are already on the street. For the first time, absolute silence hit the room. Outside, faint but growing louder by the second, the wail of sirens began to cut through the afternoon air. Charles's face changed from rage to a panicked calculation. "Mary, listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you overreacted. If you let them in here, there's no going back." Rachel stepped closer, her hands shaking. "Please, Mary. Think about what this will do to our reputation. Think about what people will say." I looked at my daughter, who was still trembling against my side. I thought about the 3 months of silence. I thought about the empty chairs at my wedding. And then I looked at the sirens flashing against my living room windows. "I am thinking about what people will say," I said. "And for once, I'm going to let them say the truth." The sirens stopped right outside. The heavy thud of car doors closing echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Charles moved first, but not toward the door to surrender. He moved toward me, his face twisted in a desperate attempt to grab the phone, his hand reaching for my wrist just as the front door was kicked open by the first responding officer. "Police! Nobody move!" The room exploded into a different kind of chaos, and as the officers swarmed in, I realized that the nightmare of the break-in was over, but the war for my life was only just beginning, because as the officers began to search Rachel's bag, they found something far more incriminating than just a pearl necklace, something that proved this wasn't just a desperate act of family members in trouble, but a long con that had been running for years. Officer Thompson held up a small, heavy object wrapped in a velvet pouch that had been tucked into a hidden lining of Rachel's bag. When he unwrapped it, I didn't see jewelry. I saw a professional-grade notary stamp, with my name on it. Beside it was a stack of life insurance documents and a revised version of my mother's will, printed on high-quality paper that looked dangerously official. "Mary, let me explain," Charles started, his voice losing its thunder and turning into a pathetic whine. "The house, the taxes, we were just trying to secure the future. Your mother would have wanted the family land to stay together." I didn't even look at him. I looked at the stamp. My sister hadn't just broken into my house to steal a necklace, she had been preparing to steal my identity, my career's worth of savings, and the very roof over Emma's head. This wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate moment of poverty. This was a calculated, cold-blooded heist. "Officer," I said, my voice as steady as it is when I'm calling for a scalpel in the OR. "That stamp is a forgery. I am a licensed surgeon, I have never owned or authorized a notary stamp in my name. And those documents, they were in my locked cabinet for a reason." Rachel began to hyperventilate, or at least, she put on the performance of someone who was. "It's not what it looks like. Dad said you were going to sell the apartment share anyway. We were just helping the process along." Officer Williams stepped toward Rachel, his hand resting near his belt. "Ma'am, stay back." "Officer Thompson, secure the evidence." "Mr. Thompson, you need to step away from the child right now." Charles didn't move fast enough, so Officer Williams moved for him. He firmly guided my father toward the kitchen counter, away from Emma. My daughter finally broke. She ran to me, her small arms wrapping around my waist so tightly I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs. I picked her up, shielding her face from the sight of her grandfather being searched by a man in a uniform. "Is Grandpa going to jail?" Emma whispered into my neck. I didn't lie to her. I couldn't. "The police are going to find out the truth, Emma. We're safe now." As the officers began the process of arresting them, the reality of the last 3 months started to click into place. 3 months ago, I had stood at the altar of a small chapel, wearing a dress that had cost me 3 months of overtime shifts. I had looked at the 2 empty chairs in the front row, the ones reserved for my father and my sister. They hadn't shown up. They hadn't even called. Later that night, while I was sitting in my honeymoon suite alone because my new husband had been called away on an emergency military deployment, I saw Rachel's Instagram post. She was on a beach in Cabo with our father. They were laughing, holding tropical drinks, the caption reading, "Family first." Needed this getaway from all the stress. The stress they were referring to was me. My wedding had been an inconvenience to their vacation. I had cried until my eyes were swollen shut, wondering what I had done to deserve being ghosted on the most important day of my life. But looking at the fake notary stamp now, I realized the vacation wasn't just a snub, it was a distraction. They had used that time to coordinate with a predatory lender Rachel had gotten involved with. They needed my signature to collateralize my share of the apartment building my mother had left me, but they knew I'd say no. So they skipped my wedding to plan my ruin. "You're making a mistake, Mary," Charles shouted as Officer Williams turned him around to click the handcuffs into place. "I raised you. I put food on your table. You're going to put your own father in a cell over some paperwork?" "It's not just paperwork, Dad," I said, finally looking him in the eye. "You used my daughter to get what you wanted. You entered my home like a thief. You didn't just skip my wedding, you tried to erase my future. We're family." Rachel screamed, her face turning a blotchy red as Officer Thompson led her toward the door. "You have millions. You're a surgeon. Why can't you just help us?" "I am a surgeon because I work 80 hours a week," I shot back. "And I have helped you. I paid your rent for 6 months after your spiritual retreat in Sedona. I paid Dad's property taxes 4 times. But the bank isn't the one taking your house, is it? You gambled it away on Rachel's business schemes, and now you've run out of my blood to drink." The officers didn't wait for the rest of the argument. They escorted them out, the heavy thud of their boots echoing on my hardwood floors. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the low hum of the police radio and the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Once the house was empty of them, the silence felt heavy. I sat Emma down on the kitchen island and gave her a glass of water. Her hands were still shaking. "I need to call Kevin," I murmured, more to myself than to her. Kevin was my lawyer, but he was also my mother's youngest brother, the only member of the Thompson family who hadn't been corrupted by my father's greed. When he answered the phone, I didn't even say hello. "They're in handcuffs, Kevin." They broke in. They had a fake notary stamp with my name on it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I heard the sound of a pen scratching against paper. "Mary, stay exactly where you are. Don't touch anything the police haven't processed yet." "Did they get into the blue folder?" "They had it on the coffee table," I said. "Rachel was trying to find the transfer deed. If they touched that folder, this goes from a simple break-in to a federal fraud investigation," Kevin said, his voice dropping into a professional, icy tone. "That folder didn't just contain property deeds. It contained the trust documents for Emma. Mary, if they had successfully transferred those shares, they wouldn't have just saved their house. They would have drained Emma's college fund to pay off Rachel's private creditors." I felt a chill wash over me that no amount of hospital coffee or surgical theater heat could ever warm. They weren't just coming for me. They were willing to rob an 8-year-old child of her education to cover their own failures. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Now," Kevin said, "we stop being family. We become the prosecution. I'm calling Detective Harris. She specializes in white-collar crime and elder fraud, but she handles domestic cases when they involve this level of forgery. I'll be at your house in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and looked at the mess in my living room. My mother's jewelry box was upturned. A photo of me on my graduation day had been knocked off the mantel, the glass shattered. I walked over and picked up the frame. My father was in the photo, smiling, his arm around my shoulder. At the time, I thought he was proud of me. Now, I wondered if he was just calculating how much a surgeon's salary could provide him. I spent the next hour walking through my own home with Detective Harris, who arrived shortly after Kevin. She was a no-nonsense woman with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. She wore a dark suit and carried a digital camera, snapping photos of the forced entry point, the back window Rachel had jimmied open after realizing the spare key had been moved. "They didn't just use a key?" Detective Harris asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "I changed the hiding spot for the spare key after they missed the wedding," I explained. "I had a feeling, a gut instinct that something had shifted. I didn't think they'd go this far, though. They didn't just go far, Dr. Thompson, Harris said, pointing to the documents on the table. Look at the dates on these forged papers. These weren't drafted yesterday. The metadata on these printouts, if they're what I think they are, will show they were created weeks ago. They've been stalking your schedule, waiting for a day when you had a double shift and the school had an early release. My stomach turned. They knew Emma would be here alone for that hour? It looks like it, Harris said grimly. Which adds endangerment of a minor and stalking to the list of charges. Your sister wasn't just looking for money. She was looking for a hostage situation. She knew you wouldn't sign for money, but you'd sign to make your daughter stop crying. Kevin walked into the room then, his briefcase looking like a weapon of war. He shook hands with Detective Harris and immediately began reviewing the inventory the police had taken. Mary, we need to talk about the house they're so desperate to save, Kevin said, pulling out a tablet. I did some digging while I was on my way over. Your father's land in the valley? It isn't just in debt. It's been underwater for 2 years. He's been taking out bridge loans from some very unsavory people to keep up appearances. Rachel has been his accountant for the whole thing. He told me it was just a temporary setback, I said, feeling naive. It wasn't temporary. It was a sinkhole, Kevin replied. And 3 months ago, when they went to Cabo, that wasn't a vacation. Rachel was meeting with a representative from a shell company. They were trying to sell your mother's apartment shares on the black market using a forged power of attorney. But the buyer got cold feet because they needed a fresh signature and a notary seal they could verify. That's why they were here today. They needed to create a live document. I looked at Emma, who was now coloring silently at the kitchen table, trying to drown out the adult talk. I realized that my family hadn't just missed my wedding. They had used the most joyous day of my life as a tactical window to try and dismantle everything I had built. They're going to ask for bail, I said. Dad will call Aunt Martha. He'll call his friends at the lodge. He'll try to spin this as a misunderstanding by his high-strung daughter. Let him, Kevin said with a grim smile. Detective Harris has the recording of the 911 call. We have the forged stamp. We have the digital trail. And most importantly, we have the truth. They begged you to save their house, Mary. But by tonight, they're going to be begging for a lawyer who can keep them out of a state penitentiary. As the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the room, the weight of the betrayal finally settled into my bones. I was a trauma surgeon. I knew how to fix hearts that had stopped beating. I knew how to sew up wounds that looked fatal. But as I looked at the empty spaces where my family used to be, I realized that some things aren't meant to be fixed, some things are meant to be amputated. Kevin, I said, my voice cold and certain. I don't want a settlement. I don't want an apology. I want the full weight of the law. I want them to realize that the bank didn't take their house, their own greed did. Consider it done, Kevin replied. But as the police cars finally disappeared and the street returned to its normal, suburban quiet, I knew the battle was only beginning. Because people like my father and Rachel don't go away quietly. They fight like cornered animals, and they were about to realize that I was no longer the daughter they could manipulate. I was the woman who was going to make sure they never set foot in this neighborhood again. The silence that followed the arrest was louder than the sirens. It was the kind of silence I usually only encountered in the middle of the night at the hospital, right after a patient's heart had finally given up and the machines were turned off. It was heavy, final, and smelled of antiseptic reality. I sat on the sofa, clutching a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Kevin was still there, his laptop screen glowing in the dim light of my living room. He was a shark in a suit, but tonight, he was the only thing keeping me anchored to the floor. They really thought they could get away with it, I whispered, more to myself than to him. People like your father don't think in terms of getting away with things, Mary, Kevin said, his eyes never leaving the spreadsheets. They think in terms of entitlement. He believes that because he raised you, your success is a community asset. He doesn't see a crime, he sees a withdrawal from a bank account he thinks he owns. I looked toward the hallway. Emma was finally asleep, her small door closed. I had spent the last hour checking on her every 10 minutes, terrified that the trauma of seeing her grandfather scream at her would leave a permanent scar. I was a trauma surgeon. I knew that the invisible wounds often bled the longest. "Tell me about the wedding, Mary," Kevin said softly, closing his laptop. "The police need a full timeline for the motive. Why did they skip it? Why Cabo?" I took a shaky breath. The memory of my wedding day 3 months ago was a blurred watercolor of white lace and deep, stinging shame. I had planned everything for over a year. It wasn't a massive affair, but it was supposed to be the one day where I wasn't Dr. Thompson, the tireless surgeon. I was just Mary. I remember standing in the bridal suite, my veil pinned, waiting for my father to walk me down the aisle. My phone had buzzed on the vanity. A text from Rachel. "So sorry, sis. Dad's blood pressure spiked. It's the heat. We're heading to the clinic. Don't let it ruin your day." I had panicked. I called them 40 times. No answer. I spent the morning of my wedding terrified my father was having a stroke. I walked myself down the aisle, my eyes red from crying, trying to explain to my new husband's family that my father was ill. 2 days later, a cousin who didn't know the official story posted a photo on Instagram. It was Charles and Rachel, tanned and smiling, holding margaritas on a balcony overlooking the ocean in Cabo San Lucas. The caption read, "Quick family getaway to celebrate the big deal. Business and pleasure." They hadn't been in a clinic. They had been in a resort. They skipped my wedding not because of a health crisis, but because Rachel had convinced my father that a crucial meeting regarding her new business venture couldn't wait. "They used my wedding as cover," I told Kevin, my voice cracking. "They knew I'd be too busy to check on them. They told everyone else they were with me, and told me they were at a clinic. It was a perfect lie." "And the big deal?" Kevin asked. "It was the shell company," I replied. "The one they wanted to use to swallow my mother's apartment shares. They needed to meet the investors in person. My wedding was just a convenient gap in my schedule." The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. 3 months later, the big deal had turned into a nightmare. The investors were actually predatory lenders. The money Rachel had invested, which was actually the last of my father's savings, was gone. And the only way to stop the bank from seizing Charles's house was to provide fresh collateral. They had begged me for 3 weeks leading up to the break-in. I remembered the first call from my father, exactly 3 months after the Cabo trip. His voice had been uncharacteristically small. "Mary, the house, there's a misunderstanding with the deed. I need you to sign a temporary guarantee. Just a formality. If you don't, they'll put me on the street." I had said no. Then Rachel called. "How can you be so cold, Mary? You have so much. You're a surgeon. You live in a palace. Dad is going to lose everything because of your pride." I had told them I would help them find a financial advisor. I offered to help them look for a smaller, more affordable apartment for my father. But I refused to put my name on his debt. I refused to let Rachel's failed business touch my daughter's future. "They didn't want help," Kevin noted. "They wanted a bailout, and when the begging failed, they moved to extraction." The next morning, the fallout intensified. My phone started vibrating at 6 a.m. It was Aunt Martha, my father's sister. "Mary, have you lost your mind?" Her voice shrieked through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Your father is in a holding cell. He's an old man. Whatever happened, you don't call the police on your own flesh and blood." "Aunt Martha, he broke into my home," I said, my voice ice cold. "He threatened Emma. He was desperate. He's losing the family home, Mary. The house your grandfather built. How can you be so selfish? Drop the charges. Right now. If you don't, the family will never speak to you again." "Then I guess I'll enjoy the silence," I said and hung up. I went to the hospital for my shift, hoping the structure of the ER would give me some peace, but the gossip had already started. In a city like this, news travels faster than an ambulance. I saw the whispers in the cafeteria. I felt the eyes of the nursing staff. In the middle of a consultation, Detective Harris called. "Dr. Thompson, we've finished the preliminary search of your father's computer and Rachel's phone. You need to come down here. This is bigger than a break-in." When I arrived at the station, Detective Harris looked tired. She laid out several printed emails on the table. They were between Rachel and a man named Leo. "Who is Leo?" I asked. "A known associate of a high-interest lending ring," Harris said. "Rachel didn't just lose the money, Mary. She took out a second mortgage on your father's house by forging his signature. He didn't even know he was losing the house until the foreclosure notice arrived 2 months ago. That's why they were so desperate for your apartment shares. They weren't trying to save the house from the bank, they were trying to pay off Leo before he went to the police about the forged mortgage." My stomach turned. So Rachel was stealing from my father, too? "She was playing both sides," Harris explained. "She told your father you were the one holding back the family inheritance. She told him that if you just signed the papers, the bank would go away. She convinced him that breaking into your house was a rescue mission to get what was rightfully his." I leaned back in the plastic chair, feeling a strange mix of pity and rage. My father was a fool, but my sister was a predator. She had used his fear of losing his legacy to turn him into a criminal. "But it gets worse," Harris continued. "We found a file on Rachel's laptop labeled Mary's assets. She's been tracking your bank accounts, your house value, and even Emma's college fund. She had a plan to file for emergency guardianship of Emma if anything ever happened to you. She'd have control of everything." The room felt like it was spinning. This wasn't just a family feud. This was a long-term, calculated hunt. They hadn't just skipped my wedding, they had been waiting for the right moment to dismantle my entire life. Just then, an officer knocked on the door. "Detective, the father, Charles Thompson, is demanding to see his daughter. He says he has a proposal that will fix everything." Detective Harris looked at me. "You don't have to see him, Mary." I stood up, my lab coat feeling like armor. "No. I want to see him. I want to hear exactly what fixing it looks like to him." They led me to a small, gray interview room. My father was sitting there, looking every bit of his 70 years. His hair was disheveled, and his hands were cuffed to the table. When he saw me, he didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed. "Mary, thank God," he huffed. "Tell these people to let me go. This has gone far enough. Your sister is a mess, she's crying in the other room. We need to get home." "You aren't going home, Dad," I said, sitting across from him. "The bank is seizing the house next week. And you're being charged with multiple felonies." "Only if you testify," he snapped, leaning forward. "Listen to me. I talked to a guy in the cell. If you drop the charges and give us the signatures for the apartment shares, I can sell them, pay off the debt, and we can buy a nice place together. You, me, Rachel, and Emma. We can be a family again. I'll forgive you for calling the cops, Mary. I really will." I stared at him, genuinely stunned. "You'll forgive me?" "Families make mistakes," he said, as if he were talking about a spilled glass of milk. "But we stick together. If I go to jail, the Thompson name is ruined. Is that what you want? To be the daughter who put her father in a cage? You put yourself in this cage the moment you stepped into my house and scared my daughter," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And Rachel? She forged your signature, Dad. She's the reason you're losing the house." He waved his hand dismissively. "She was trying to help. She's ambitious. Like you. Now, call your lawyer. Tell him we have a deal." I realized then that there was no saving him. He was a man built on a foundation of delusions and narcissism. He didn't want my help, he wanted my submission. "The deal is over," I said, standing up. "I'm not signing anything. I'm not dropping the charges. In fact, I've instructed Kevin to cooperate fully with the DA to ensure Rachel gets the maximum sentence for the mortgage forgery as well. My father's face turned a shade of purple I had only seen in cardiac patients. You ungrateful bitch. Everything I did for this family. You think you're so high and mighty in your scrubs? You're nothing without the Thompson name. The Thompson name is just a word, Dad, I said, walking toward the door. But my daughter's peace of mind is my life. Enjoy the house while you can. I hear the bank moves fast. As I walked out of the station, the afternoon sun hit my face. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk Mary, it's Rachel. Please. Leo is looking for me. If I don't get the money by Friday, I'm dead. You have to save the house. It's the only way he'll back off. I'm sorry about Emma. I'm sorry about the wedding. Please don't let them kill your sister. Asterisk. I looked at the message, then at the police station behind me. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Detective Harris and Kevin. The 3 months later mark wasn't just the anniversary of a skipped wedding or the start of a foreclosure. It was the expiration date of my patience. I drove home, picked up Emma from school, and took her for ice cream. We sat in the park, watching the ducks. For the first time in months, I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't check my bank balance with a racing heart. But that night, as I was tucking Emma in, she asked a question that reminded me the battle wasn't over. Mom? Is Aunt Rachel a bad person? I smoothed her hair back. She made some very bad choices, honey. And she hurt people to get what she wanted. Are they coming back for the blue folder? No, I promised. The blue folder is in a safe place. And so are we. But as I walked back to the kitchen, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. It didn't look like a police car. It didn't look like a neighbor's car. It sat there, engine idling, its tinted windows reflecting the street lights. I realized then that Rachel's debts weren't just hers anymore. By refusing to save the house, I hadn't just closed a door on my family, I had opened one for the people they owed money to. And in their world, if the person who owes you can't pay, you look for the person who has the most to lose. I picked up the phone and called Kevin. Kevin, I need you to look into a name. Leo. And I need you to find out exactly how much Rachel told him I was worth. Why? Kevin's voice was sharp. Because there's a car outside my house, I said, my hand tightening on the curtain. And I don't think they're here to talk about the mortgage. The house was gone. The family was broken. But the debt was looking for a new home. And as a surgeon, I knew that when a person is bleeding out, you don't just watch. You find the source and you shut it down, no matter how much it hurts. I turned off the lights, grabbed my daughter, and moved us to the interior hallway, far from the windows. I was done being the victim. If they wanted a fight, they were about to find out that a trauma surgeon knows exactly where it hurts the most. The blue lights of the patrol cars eventually replaced the idling engine of the black sedan. Detective Harris called me an hour later with a voice that sounded as cold as the Montana night. The men in that car weren't just neighbors, they were associates of the man Rachel called Leo. It turned out my sister hadn't just skipped my wedding, she had sold my safety to buy herself time. She had told these men that I, the rich surgeon, was hiding the collateral they needed in a blue folder inside my house. This was the final piece of evidence Kevin needed to ensure the Thompson name didn't protect them this time. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it was a criminal conspiracy that put an 8-year-old child in the crosshairs of violent men. In the courtroom, Charles tried to play the role of the misunderstood patriarch, wearing his Sunday best and leaning on a cane he didn't need. But when the prosecutor played the recording of him shouting at Emma, the mask shattered. The judge didn't see a grandfather, she saw a predator. Rachel's tears were equally ineffective. Her defense that she was desperate fell apart when Detective Harris presented the evidence that she had directed debt collectors to my private residence. The sentence was a surgical strike to their egos. Charles was sentenced to 18 months in county custody for felony burglary and child endangerment. Rachel received 3 years, her license and her reputation permanently revoked. 3 months after they begged me to save their house, the bank finally took it. I watched the foreclosure sign go up from a distance, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief. I didn't buy the house. I didn't pay the debt. I let it go, just like I let them go. As a trauma surgeon, I'm trained to know when a limb is beyond saving. If you don't amputate the necrosis, it spreads until it kills the patient. My father and sister were the infection. By cutting them out of my life, I finally allowed Emma and me to breathe. Our home is now a sanctuary of real peace, protected by new locks and a mother who no longer confuses loyalty with silence. If you were in my position, would you have sacrificed your daughter's safety to protect your father's house, or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments. If this story reminded you that boundaries are a form of self-love, please like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.